The pieces that make up the puzzle of the 2025 college football season are all still falling into place. But even with that being said, we still have several important pieces in place for most of the teams in the country. We know which coaches will be there for the most part. We know most of the players that will be on a lot of these rosters, barring some craziness in the spring portal, which can always happen. But operating with the information we had, I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and do an early pre-spring college football playoff prediction for the 2025 season. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get into the bracket itself, I do want to acknowledge we're going to be going off of the seeding rules from last season that are still currently in place for this upcoming season with auto buys for the conference champions. I know that there's some discussions right now that could possibly change for next year, but as of right now, it's still auto buys for the top 4 ranked conference champions and auto bids for the top 5. So let's get into it by looking at our candidates. Our candidates are going to come from, of course, the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC, which are not officially guaranteed playoff spots. However, they are most likely to be the top 4 conferences in terms of their conference champions and most likely to get those top 4 bids. We're also going to take a look at the group of 5 and the independents. Now, the teams you see here are the teams that I'm seriously considering as playoff teams or potential playoff teams in this upcoming season. So that's why it's not a complete picture for each one of these conferences, just the teams that are either higher in odds or teams that I really think should be taken seriously next season and considered when talking about these spots. So we'll start with the candidates in the SEC, where I think we have a couple of locks. I think Texas and Georgia are a couple of programs that are operating at a very, very high level right now to where can't really realistically, especially at this point in the offseason, deny them of a playoff spot. Georgia was in a down year last year and still comfortably made the playoffs, and Texas nearly won the entire SEC in their first season, and Sark has shown they can reload very effectively since he's gotten them up to full speed. Florida and South Carolina are some trendy offseason darlings out of this group, and I'm just not sure how much I trust those guys with the daunting schedules that they have. There's just too much that can go wrong, so at this point, I'm out on those guys, which leaves us with LSU, Texas A&M, and Tennessee that are on there. For Tennessee and Texas A&M, they have schedules that are pretty daunting. I do love the returning production numbers for the Aggies, and I do like Nico as an idea, as a guy that could break out and really push the Tennessee ceiling up even higher, especially with Tim Banks returning a defensive coordinator, all the things they have going right there. But honestly, when I look at who I trust the most out of these 4, I think DeBoer's second season will be money at Alabama. I think there's a lot of things that were not fully implemented last season that will be implemented. I love that Ryan Grubb is coming back. And then I'm excited for LSU's defensive rebuild. I really think it could pay big dividends this season. They've gotten the right guys in the building. I love Blake Baker and this staff he has, and I think it's one of the most talented defensive units they've had in a while with all the key returnees. So my picks for the SEC are actually going to be Georgia, Texas, LSU, and Alabama. So let's go ahead and plop those guys into our college football playoff. I'm going to give Texas the 1 seed. I think it's most likely that the SEC champion gets the number 1 seed, and in this case, it's going to be the Texas Longhorns, who have a very manageable and navigatable schedule to get them the number 1 spot. I know Oregon got it last season of the Big Ten. You could argue that the Big Ten's a little bit more likely to get it just because teams are more likely to end up coming out undefeated because it's less of a gauntlet, but I'm still just going to rock with Texas for now. I think Georgia's going to get close to the highest at-large spot at number 6. I think Bama's going to fall in at number 8. Maybe the Crimson Tide are a team that makes the SEC title game and loses that, and that affects them or something along those lines. And then I'm looking at an LSU team that loses maybe 2 or 3 games and sort of just barely gets their way in there as the last at-large spot because I think it is a gauntlet in the SEC, and I think some teams are going to get dinged with losses. So we filled in our first 4 spots in the playoff. Let's get to the Big Ten. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. College football has a notoriously long offseason, and without the constant stimulation of dozens of games between hundreds of teams and thousands of storylines in college football, it can leave you with a lot of spare time. And what better way to take advantage of that spare time than to focus on your mental health? BetterHelp is a service that connects you with a therapist from a network of 30,000 plus licensed professionals with a wide range of specialties and backgrounds. BetterHelp is fully online, making it comfortable and convenient to get started. You just fill out a quick survey and they'll match you with someone in just a matter of days. A BetterHelp therapist can help you untangle external pressures from internal values. It can help you develop tools to measure progress on your own terms and track your growth, because tracking your growth in such a thing is very important. Going to therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/CFBudge to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Huge thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. We take a look at our candidates in the Big Ten, and we'll start with the locks. I think Oregon and Penn State and Ohio State, simply due to their talent level and to what exists in the Big Ten right now, especially in the bottom half, there are very, very few scenarios where any one of these programs is going to miss the college football playoff. So as far as I'm concerned, those guys are all locks for now. I'm loving those guys. The Ducks, I do have questions and concerns about Dante Moore. I made a controversial video about that in short form fashion a week ago or so, but I still do think the Ducks will make the college football playoff for the reasons I just mentioned. The Illinois hype makes me a little bit skeptical. I know they have a ton of returning production, but the talent level I just don't think is going to be something that's going to push them to playoff status, especially with still a difficult schedule they're going to have to manage. I don't think Michigan's offensive overhaul was going to be all sunshine and rainbows, so I'm out on those two teams. We've got Nebraska, Washington, and USC, which I just think those programs, although I do like them a lot, and I do think there's a scenario that plays out where any one of them could have a big breakout season, they're just too far off to trust. The last time we saw each of those teams, none of them finished better than 7-6. So I just cannot fully give myself up to any one of those guys. And then we've got Indiana, where Indiana actually has a pretty manageable schedule again, but it really felt like a magical season where a lot went well for them. I think they'll come back to earth with another solid portal class, but it just is the law of averages. Things aren't going to pan out the same way they did this last year. So actually my only picks for the Big Ten will be Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. I think the Big Ten will have a little bit of a down year compared to the fantastic season they just had where they had all these contenders and all of these playoff teams. I think they'll get 3 of them. In terms of placing them, I actually do think Penn State is capable of winning the Big Ten this year. So I'm going to give them the 2 seed and say they win the conference this season. I think they get some really good schedule dynamics in their favor this season. And then I also just think they have this circled as a year they can contend, whereas teams like Oregon and Ohio State are filling maybe some questionable holds or had a lot more churn this offseason they would have liked. But I'm still going to have Ohio State as the highest ranked at-large team at 5, and then the Ducks getting in at number 9 as what I think is still a 2-loss team, probably ending up in that territory, or maybe a 1-loss team that doesn't play in the conference title game. So let's get to the Big 12, where I don't think you can call anyone a lock in the Big 12 because it's the Big 12. It is just chaos. They're going to have a better top line this season, I think, than they did last season. Last season, there was really no clear top line. Arizona State ends up winning the thing, but they still had 2 losses to Cincinnati and Texas Tech. So it's really, I think, going to be a little bit more separation because we've got teams that are returning a ton of production that were already near the top. I think the Utes have too many concerns for me. Iowa State loses just a little bit more than I'm comfortable with this season. They kind of have a slightly different dynamic than last year, which was literally everybody coming back. You know, it kind of felt like a team of destiny, and they did make the Big 12 title game, but I'm out on Iowa State and Utah. I think Texas Tech and Arizona State are 2 teams I really like because of the aforementioned returning production. Arizona State is 2 in the country in returning production. Texas Tech is 4. I love that on top of the product we saw with both of these teams last season. Texas Tech's portal class is ridiculous. Arizona State did a nice job as well, but I'm really liking their recruiting and also just their continuity. So I think they can be trusted, and I actually do think both of their schedules lend themselves to a solid performance. We do, of course, have Baylor, TCU, Kansas State, BYU. There's reasons to believe in all 4 of those programs, but when we're talking about the Big 12, I think you're talking about maximum 2 teams getting in, and if we were talking about this group of teams, I do really love Baylor, I do really love Kansas State, but I'm going to end up rocking with Texas Tech and Arizona State, and I do think the Big 12 can get 2 bids this season because I think they're just going to have that strong of a season with all of the teams that seem to have this circled as a year where they could really break out. So I think Arizona State gets the 4 seed as the 4th highest ranked conference champion, and then I'm going to give Texas Tech the 10 seed as one of those final at-large teams. Maybe they get through with only 1 loss to Arizona State or maybe a Big 12 championship loss in there as well. This isn't an exact science. We're still in the pre-spring, mind you, but that's where I'd throw them in the bracket. So that takes us to the ACC, which is our final power conference to take a look at. I think Clemson is a lock here because Clemson is going to win this conference until further notice. Even in down seasons, Dabo Swinney and Clemson are in the picture and winning it most of the time. And so we've got the other candidates here: Louisville, SMU, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Miami. I really think SMU loses a lot of what made them kind of special last season. They're still definitely going to be a contender, but I don't think they're going to be as fantastic as they were this last year, where a lot of line for them. them. I don't think North Carolina can be trusted just on their soft schedule alone. It's been shown that when it's a team in that tier, like a Syracuse, they're still liable to like a lapse every once in a while, even if they have a really easy schedule. It was like last year when Syracuse lost to Stanford. So that gets rid of those guys. We've got Miami. They have the trendy quarterback and the talent, technically the talent edge on everybody else. Louisville has the portal infusion. Georgia Tech has the chip on their shoulder. They're a big story. They almost took out Georgia at the end of the year. So am I going to rock with any of those teams? I actually don't think I will. I think the ACC is going to end up on the wrong end of too many of those non-conference games, and I think they're only going to end up getting that one bid this year, kind of the Big 12 sniping one of their bids possibly. So I'm going to give Clemson that spot as the 3 seed, the 3rd highest ranked conference champion. I do think the Tigers run the ACC this year and are the only ACC team to make the playoff. So this takes us to the group of 5 and Independence, where I think Notre Dame, with that schedule, as long as they have a schedule that is not insanely daunting, still has solid opponents on it. Obviously, I'm not calling it a pathetic schedule, but based on what we saw last year, I think Notre Dame's perfectly capable of getting to 11-1 or maybe even 10-2 in some seasons, and that's the record will be required of them to make the playoff. They have a pretty clear path, so I think they're a lock in terms of the purposes of this video, not to say they're like just a complete automatic lock to the playoffs. Although I realize that's a little bit confusing of a choice of words. But talking about the group of 5 schools, I think the Sun Belt is too deep to rely on a contender, so that kind of knocks out Louisiana and Texas State. And then we look to the American Conference. I think they lack a true top contender this year. I love Tulane. I do like what South Florida's building, but I just think that too much was lost from Tulane this last season. Having to replace Darian Mensah and figure out the quarterback situation might be a lot to overcome. Memphis isn't exactly having a target year, so it leaves us with the Mountain West schools of UNLV, Colorado State, and Boise State. And the Broncos, despite losing Ashton Jeanty, they're still like top 10 in returning production this next season, and a team I think people are sleeping on just because Jeanty's out the door. So my stock is still very high in Boise State. I think they're still going to be the group of 5 champion and the one that represents in the playoffs. So my picks are Notre Dame and Boise State. So I give Boise State the 12 spot, and then Notre Dame will slide into the 3rd highest ranked at-large bid at the 7 seed, which is actually what they got this last season. So it makes a lot of sense. And so there it is. We put the picture together slowly but surely. My pre-spring college football playoff with Alabama as the 8 seed, Oregon playing them as the 9 seed. This game would be at Alabama, Boise State at Ohio State, LSU at Georgia, Texas Tech at Notre Dame. Not going to be picking these games in here because I think doing a pre-spring playoff prediction is silly enough as it is. Picking it is just another level of silly. But if I had to pick a national champion at this point, I think I'm going to be rocking with the Texas Longhorns. I love a lot of the stuff they have going for them. I am an Arch Manning believer, and I think the Longhorns have what it takes to win a national title. So there it is, my pre-spring college football playoff predictions. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this bracket, which teams you would interchange if your bracket looks completely different. Let me know what your seeds look like, 1 through 12, or maybe just your conference champions and some candidates to win at their conferences or be at-large bids on the other hand. So I had a lot of fun making this video. It's always fun to just sort of spitball and look at the ideas of the ways things could play out the next season, but that's all I have for you guys in today's video, and I will see you guys later this week.